5 gruesome Reddit love stories that ended in bloodshed. Number 1. The unexpected meeting. I had just joined Reddit's subreddit for dating advice, desperate for a connection after a rough breakup. I never imagined it would lead to something so horrifying. The first message I received seemed innocent enough. It was a generic "Hi. How are you?" Little did I know, this was the beginning of something terrifying. He was polite and charming, claiming to be a fellow single looking for advice. His messages seemed sincere, filled with encouragement and sympathy for my recent heartache. He frequently commented on my posts, always offering reassurance and subtly complimenting me. I felt flattered, thinking I had finally found someone who understood me. Our conversations quickly became personal. He started asking about my daily life and my deepest fears. I was uncomfortable but ignored the growing sense of unease. He would send messages late at night, often with peculiar questions about my routines and habits. It felt invasive, but I rationalized it as part of getting to know someone. When I mentioned a family vacation, he seemed overly interested in the details. His questions were meticulous, making me feel uneasy. He began sending gifts, small tokens that seemed thoughtful at first, but they quickly turned unsettling. One gift was a locket containing a photo of a stranger, which he claimed was a family heirloom. He started mentioning that he had a special connection with me, suggesting that fate had brought us together. I was taken aback, feeling increasingly disturbed by his fixation. Despite my reservations, I continued communicating with him, hoping to see the good in his intentions. I began to regret my decision as his messages grew more intense. He started sending cryptic messages about meeting soon and our destiny awaits. Each message heightened my anxiety. One night, he disclosed personal information about my past that he shouldn't have known. I realized he had been digging into my life far more than he should. He grew impatient when I was slow to respond, sending angry messages demanding more attention. His frustration was palpable and frightening. I tried to distance myself, but his persistence was relentless. He would not accept my silence or attempts to cut off communication. His messages became more threatening, suggesting that our connection was meant to be, and that rejecting it would have consequences. The tone of his messages shifted to a sinister edge. He sent me a picture of my home, taken from the street, with a note saying, "I'm closer than you think." The realization that he was watching me made my blood run cold. My fear escalated when I received a message saying he would come to take what's ours. The threat felt all too real and imminent. I went to the police, but they couldn't act without solid evidence of a crime. Their lack of immediate action only deepened my terror. One evening, as I was preparing to go out, I saw him standing across the street from my house. The sight of him in person, staring with a menacing gaze, was horrifying. I called the police immediately, but by the time they arrived, he was gone. He left no trace, only a lingering sense of dread. He continued to harass me through various online platforms, using different aliases to evade detection. Each message was more disturbing than the last. I began receiving packages with items that hinted he knew my every move and every detail of my life. The invasiveness of his behavior was unbearable. He started threatening to harm those I cared about if I didn't comply with his demands. The threats were specific and chilling, making me fear for my loved ones. My anxiety grew as he became more erratic, sending rambling messages about our supposed destiny together. His obsession was consuming him and me. I took extra precautions, changing my routine and employing security measures, but it felt like a futile effort. The paranoia became a constant companion. Despite my attempts to protect myself, I often felt like he was always just out of sight, watching and waiting. His presence was a constant, unseen threat. His final message came one night, filled with promises of a dramatic confrontation. He declared that our story would end with a grand finale that would change my life forever. In the days that followed, I stayed in constant fear, anticipating the worst. Every creak of the house or knock at the door set me on edge. Eventually, he disappeared without a trace, leaving me with lingering trauma and unanswered questions. His sudden absence was as unnerving as his presence. To this day, I wonder if he will return, or if the nightmare has truly ended. The fear of the unknown remains a constant shadow over my life. Number 2. The terrifying turn of events. I met her in a dating subreddit and thought she was the perfect match. At first, everything seemed ideal, filled with romantic gestures and mutual interests. We shared stories of our lives and dreams, and her replies were always warm and inviting. Her enthusiasm made me believe in the possibility of a perfect relationship. As we talked more, she revealed darker aspects of her life, troubles with past relationships, and a family history of mental illness. Her openness was both intriguing and unsettling. Despite the red flags, I was drawn to her, captivated by her intensity and vulnerability. I ignored the warnings my instincts were screaming at me. She began sending me messages about feeling a mystical connection and how fate had brought us together. Her language was increasingly obsessive. One day she suggested we meet in person, promising it would be the start of something magical. I was hesitant, but ultimately agreed. Our first meeting seemed normal, but her behavior was oddly intense and possessive. She seemed to hang on every word I said. She started showing up unannounced at my apartment, claiming she was in the neighborhood. Her intrusions were becoming more frequent and unsettling. Her texts grew more demanding, and she began to express jealousy over my interactions with other people. Her possessiveness was frighteningly excessive. I tried to end things, but she refused to accept it, insisting that we were meant to be together. Her refusal to let go felt like a prison. She started sending gifts that were increasingly disturbing: a lock of hair, a box of personal items from my apartment. Her invasion of my privacy was alarming. Her messages became threatening, suggesting that she would do whatever it takes to keep us together. The threats were specific and terrifying. I tried to distance myself, but she continued to track my whereabouts and confront me. Her persistence made me feel like a prisoner in my own life. She started making ominous statements about our future together, which included disturbing visions of violence. Her fantasies were deeply unsettling. One night, she left a message saying she had a surprise for me, and I should be ready. The anticipation was filled with dread. When I went to my apartment, I found it ransacked and a message written in lipstick on the mirror: "You belong to me." The violation of my personal space was horrifying. I began receiving anonymous threats and disturbing notes, each one more violent than the last. The fear for my safety was overwhelming. She started contacting my friends and family, trying to persuade them that I was the problem. Her manipulation was spreading my nightmare to those I cared about. I sought help from the police, but she always seemed to slip through their grasp. Her cunning evasion tactics made me feel helpless. The harassment continued to escalate, culminating in a terrifying encounter where she appeared with a weapon, claiming she would fix everything. The confrontation was a nightmare come to life. I managed to escape and go into hiding, but the fear never left me. Her presence haunted my every waking moment. I changed my routine, moved to a different location, and altered my appearance, but the paranoia remained. Her obsession was inescapable. The police eventually apprehended her after a series of violent incidents that led to her being caught. Her capture brought a sense of relief, but the trauma lingered. The court proceedings were a chilling reminder of how close I came to a devastating end. The reality of her intentions was deeply disturbing. Even now, I'm haunted by the memories of her threats and the fear she instilled in me. The emotional scars remain as fresh as ever. Her obsession was so consuming that it almost ended my life, and the thought of what could have been still chills me. I wonder how close I came to a tragic end. The fear of her reoffending or seeking revenge still lingers in my mind. The uncertainty of her future actions is unsettling. I keep a low profile and avoid publicizing my personal life, always wary of being followed. The sense of being constantly watched never fully fades. I wonder if I will ever be free of the shadow she cast over my life. The lingering fear affects my daily existence. The trauma has left me deeply mistrustful and anxious, affecting my relationships and sense of security. I am forever marked by the horrors of her obsession. Number 3. The grim consequences. I found myself on Reddit's love advice forum, seeking guidance after a series of failed relationships. What began as a quest for love turned into a harrowing ordeal. Her messages were initially comforting, offering advice and empathy. She seemed like a caring individual who understood my struggles. As we conversed more, her advice became increasingly personal and invasive. She asked about my deepest fears and vulnerabilities. Her questions about my past seemed innocent at first, but they became more probing. I began to feel uncomfortable with her intrusive nature. Despite my reservations, I continued to engage with her, hoping to find some solace. Her persistence and seeming concern made me overlook the growing discomfort. She started to reveal personal details about her own life, often in a dramatic and distressing manner. Her stories were filled with trauma and intense emotions. Her messages began to take on a more obsessive tone, expressing a deep and overwhelming connection. The intensity was unsettling. She suggested we meet in person, claiming that it was essential for our connection to flourish. Her urgency made me uneasy, but I agreed. Our first meeting was marked by her erratic behavior, which left me feeling uneasy. Her need for validation and reassurance was overwhelming. She began showing up unannounced at my home, always with a sense of urgency and desperation. Her presence was unsettling and invasive. Her behavior grew increasingly erratic, and she started making demands that felt unreasonable and controlling. Her neediness was stifling. She began to express violent fantasies about our future together, which were deeply disturbing. Her dark imaginings were a source of constant fear. Her messages became threats, warning me of dire consequences if I did not comply with her demands. The threats were specific and chilling. She started to manipulate my emotions, using guilt and fear to control me. Her tactics were emotionally draining and terrifying. One evening, I found a message threatening violence if I did not agree to her terms. The threat was a stark reminder of her dangerous obsession. Her behavior escalated to physical violence, with instances of breaking into my home and damaging my property. The physical invasions were deeply distressing. I sought legal protection, but her unpredictable nature made it difficult to anticipate her next move. The constant fear of her next action was overwhelming. Her threats and actions became more violent, culminating in a terrifying confrontation where she attacked me. The violence was shocking and traumatic. I managed to escape, but the experience left me traumatized and deeply fearful. The terror of that night still haunts me. The police eventually apprehended her, but the aftermath of the ordeal was emotionally devastating. Her capture did little to ease the emotional scars. The court case was a grim reminder of the horrors I had endured, and the legal process was a constant source of anxiety. The legal battle added to my trauma. Even now, I struggle with the emotional fallout from her obsession, affecting my relationships and mental health. The psychological impact remains severe. Her obsession with me had dire consequences, and the fear of what might have happened still lingers. The close call with disaster is a constant reminder. I continue to live in fear of her potentially seeking revenge or reoffending. The uncertainty of her future actions is a source of ongoing anxiety. The trauma has led me to be highly cautious about sharing personal information or engaging in new relationships. The experience has made me distrustful and guarded. I often wonder if I will ever fully recover from the emotional scars left by her obsession. The long-term effects of her actions are a constant worry. The fear of being targeted again or having my life disrupted by another obsessed individual is a persistent anxiety. The sense of vulnerability remains. I avoid discussing my past experiences with others, fearing that it might attract unwanted attention. The need for secrecy is a lasting effect of the ordeal. The psychological impact of her obsession has altered my view of relationships and trust. The trauma has made it difficult to form new connections. I question whether I will ever find peace or if the shadows of her obsession will always linger in my life. The haunting memories continue to affect my daily existence. What do you think of these disturbing stories of obsession and violence that began with seemingly innocent interactions? Have you ever experienced something similar, or do you have any thoughts on the nature of such extreme behavior? Leave a comment below. Number 4. A mysterious connection. I started frequenting a Reddit forum dedicated to relationship advice, where I hoped to find comfort and guidance. Little did I know, this would lead me into a nightmare. One user consistently commented on my posts, offering support and sharing similar experiences. Initially, their kindness seemed genuine and encouraging. Their messages grew increasingly personal, delving into topics I hadn't shared publicly. The depth of their knowledge about my life was unsettling. They began to suggest that we connect privately, arguing it would be more beneficial. Their insistence, masked as concern, began to feel invasive. Despite my reservations, I agreed to chat privately, hoping for some good advice. What began as innocent conversation quickly took a dark turn. Their messages grew obsessive, focusing intensely on every detail of my life. Their knowledge about me was so precise it was alarming. They started making demands about our conversations, insisting on daily updates about my whereabouts. Their controlling behavior was disturbing. Their messages began to include unsettling statements about our fated connection and how we were meant to be together. The tone became increasingly sinister. They began to express anger and frustration when I didn't respond quickly enough, making veiled threats about the consequences. The threats were subtle but menacing. I tried to distance myself, but their persistence grew. They would not accept any attempt at cutting off communication. They started sending unsolicited gifts, each one more intrusive than the last, including items that seemed oddly personal. Their invasion of privacy was terrifying. Their messages included detailed accounts of my daily routine, making it clear they were tracking my every move. The realization that I was being monitored was chilling. They expressed a desire to protect me, which felt more like a threat than a gesture of care. Their claims of protection were deeply unsettling. One evening, they sent a message declaring that they knew where I lived and planned to visit me. The threat of an in-person encounter was horrifying. I reported their behavior to the authorities, but they seemed to evade any substantial investigation. The lack of immediate action from the police heightened my fear. Their threats escalated, including graphic descriptions of potential harm if I didn't comply with their demands. The violent imagery was deeply disturbing. They began showing up outside my home, lurking in the shadows and making me feel constantly watched. The fear of their presence was overwhelming. Their behavior became increasingly erratic, with random, frightening outbursts and threats. The unpredictability of their actions made me feel unsafe. I attempted to change my routine and employ additional security measures, but their persistence made it feel like a futile effort. The feeling of being trapped was suffocating. One night, they broke into my home, leaving a chilling message on the wall about our destined togetherness. The violation of my space was deeply traumatic. Their fixation continued unabated, and they began making direct threats against my friends and family. The fear for my loved ones' safety added to my terror. I took drastic measures to protect myself, including moving to a different location and altering my appearance. The constant need for secrecy was exhausting. Despite these efforts, I still felt their presence lurking in the shadows, a constant source of anxiety. The sense of being followed was inescapable. Their threats and obsessive behavior continued to escalate, leading to a series of increasingly violent incidents. The violence was a constant threat to my safety. Eventually, they were apprehended after a dramatic confrontation where they attempted to harm me. Their capture provided some relief, but the trauma remained. The legal proceedings that followed were a grim reminder of the horrors I had endured. The court case was a harrowing experience. Even now, I live in constant fear of potential retaliation or reoffending. The worry about their future actions never fully dissipates. The experience has left me with deep emotional scars, affecting my ability to trust and form new relationships. The psychological impact has been severe. I continue to struggle with anxiety and fear, deeply affected by the invasion of my personal space and safety. The trauma has altered my daily life. I wonder if I will ever fully recover from the ordeal, or if the shadows of their obsession will forever haunt me. The lasting impact of their actions is a persistent worry. Number 5. The descent into madness. My journey on Reddit started with innocent questions about dating, seeking advice after a series of failed relationships. What seemed like a simple quest for help soon spiraled into a nightmare. One user's responses were consistently supportive and insightful, making them stand out from the rest. Their apparent wisdom and empathy drew me in. They began to share personal stories that mirrored my own experiences, creating a false sense of intimacy. The shared experiences seemed to bond us closer. Their messages became increasingly intense, focusing on the minutiae of my life and expressing deep concern. Their obsession was masked as care. They suggested we move our conversations to a private platform, arguing it was more secure and personal. I hesitated but agreed, hoping for more tailored advice. Their messages took a dark turn, filled with possessive language and demands for constant updates. Their controlling behavior grew more apparent. They started sending disturbing messages about how we were fated to be together and that our connection was predestined. The intensity of their fixation was unsettling. Their demands for attention grew, and they expressed anger when I didn't respond promptly. Their threats became more overt and alarming. I tried to set boundaries, but their responses were increasingly aggressive and threatening. Their refusal to accept limits was frightening. They began to send gifts that seemed intrusive and unsettling, including items from my personal life. Their knowledge of my life was unnervingly detailed. Their messages started to include explicit threats and violent fantasies about our future. The disturbing content of their threats was horrifying. One day they sent a message detailing how they would punish me if I did not comply with their wishes. The threats were both specific and chilling. They began showing up unannounced at my home, claiming they wanted to discuss our future. Their uninvited visits were deeply disturbing. Their behavior became increasingly unpredictable, with sudden outbursts and erratic actions. The unpredictability made me feel constantly on edge. Despite my attempts to cut off communication, they found new ways to contact me, using different platforms and aliases. Their persistence was relentless. They started contacting my friends and family, trying to manipulate them into convincing me to respond. Their attempts to involve others were invasive and distressing. One night, they broke into my home, leaving behind disturbing messages and evidence of their intrusion. The violation of my personal space was terrifying. The constant fear and anxiety took a toll on my mental health, affecting my daily life and relationships. The emotional impact was profound. I sought help from authorities, but their ability to evade detection made it difficult to find relief. The lack of immediate action from the police added to my fear. Their threats continued to escalate, leading to a dramatic confrontation where they attempted to harm me. The physical danger was a nightmare come to life. Their capture provided some relief, but the trauma of their obsession continued to haunt me. The aftermath of their actions left lasting scars. The court proceedings were a grim reminder of the horrors I had faced, and the legal process was emotionally draining. The experience was a constant source of stress. Even now, I live in fear of potential retaliation or further incidents. The worry about their possible return is a constant source of anxiety. The experience has deeply affected my ability to trust others and form new relationships. The trauma has made me wary and guarded. I continue to struggle with anxiety and fear, impacted by the invasion of my personal safety and space. The emotional scars remain raw. The ordeal has changed my perspective on online interactions, making me cautious and mistrustful. The need for privacy and security is heightened. I wonder if I will ever fully recover from the emotional impact of their obsession. The lingering effects of their actions continue to affect my life. The fear of being targeted again or having my life disrupted by another obsessive individual is a persistent anxiety. The sense of vulnerability remains. I avoid discussing my past experiences with others, fearing it might attract unwanted attention or similar situations. The need for secrecy is a lasting effect of the ordeal. The trauma has left me questioning if I will ever find peace, or if the shadows of their obsession will always linger. The haunting memories continue to impact my daily existence. What are your thoughts on these chilling stories of obsession and violence originating from seemingly innocent interactions? Have you ever encountered similar situations or have any insights on dealing with such extreme behavior? Leave a comment below. And that's it from this video.